Hello and welcome back to our series on beginning app script for HR brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions, and in this video I'd like to carry on with where we left off in our previous video concerning dependent drop downs. So we created this button and this custom menu item up here, and we can select create drop down, and over here on our dashboard tab it will create a validation with a list of items in the form of a drop down. And what we did through our if statements is depending on what a user selected, like if they selected employee, it would create a secondary dropdown with specific items. And then if we selected people analytics, it would then go through and update that list and populate accordingly. Now you'll notice that there are some things that are happening that we don't want to happen. And the first one is when we switch this first drop down box, it doesn't clear that. We have to wait. And it doesn't actually change the value that was previously set in there. So it's an invalid because it's requiring these. So we want to clear this before it runs that logic. And also when we create a drop down, again, if somebody just wants to come here and mash that button, it'll go through the script as normal, but it's not clearing the values. And if we were to say refresh the whole page, the same thing. It's not actually clearing those values. So what I would like to do first is go through, and when the page opens, whether it's refreshed or opened up after being closed, I would like to clear both the validation and the content, and I'll get into the difference between the validation and the content once we start writing the code. And then I also want to clear it when we hit our create dropdown. And then I want to clear this bottom second dropdown once we change something here. And then I also want to remove, like when we hit unknown, when it hits unknown, we're just pulling up this pop-up box here, and we can write instructions in here. But what I would like to do is remove this validation as well as this content as well. So let's start doing that. Let's go back over here to our code. And the first thing we want to tackle is that on open. So let's scroll up here to our on open. Now this is a trigger function that surprisingly opens or is called and runs when the page is open or the sheet is open. And we want to clear out that validation and content first thing before it even loads our custom menu item here. So we can put it right up here at top. And what we're going to do is we are going to call our dashboard variable. And that dashboard variable contains that dashboard sheet. And then we got to get the range of those two cells. So the range of these two cells are right here. They start at row 3, column 1. And they go down 2 rows and 1 column. Now we could write this in A1 notation, which would be A3 to A4. I prefer just using the numbers simply because as we start progressing through our journey with AppScript, or you start doing more and more things, you'll find that you'll be dealing with numbers a whole lot more than you will be dealing with A1 notations. So let's go back to our code here and enter that range. So we get range, and we're starting at row 3, column 1, and we are including 2 rows and 1 column. Now what we want to do is we want to clear the data validations. It's a method, so we need the parentheses. And then after we clear the data validations, which means it takes away that drop down box, we want to clear the content. Now we want to ensure that we clear the data validation, because the data validation itself is not simply the drop down functionality. It also contains the list So if we were to simply just clear the content, take the text out of that cell, those values within that drop down box would still remain. So we would have to then wait for it to update, or we could confuse users by having them select something in that second drop down. So it's just easier to clear the validation and the content all at once. So we did that on open. Now let's do it on this function when we create our drop down. And then let's save this and see how that actually works. So we'll come back over here to our sheet. Now you notice we have a value and we also have the drop down. So let's test this by pressing our create drop down again. And as you can see, it cleared it. And we weren't able to really pick it up with our eye, but it cleared this validation as well. And then it repopulated the validation. And now let's select something and then we'll refresh the page to make sure that also works. So we'll refresh our page. Drop downs there and it should clear. And it does. So good. So now we've effectively cleared it. And what I would like to do is also work on another aspect here, and that is when we change this first drop down box, and there's something here in drop down box number 2, when we change that, I would like to clear the content of this first, or we could just clear the validation too, and then have it populate. And then also I'd like to get rid of the whole thing when we do our unknown. So let's go in there and do that as well. And when we clear our unknown and our second drop down, we don't want to clear this whole range. We just want to clear row 4, column 1, which is that second drop down box. And when we want to clear that is when our code is checking to see if A3 changed. So what we're saying is if there is an event in the range A3, then we run this if that's true. So if there is a change in that, that's when we want to clear that. So we can come in here and paste it there. Now we don't want to paste, we don't want to clear that first drop down box because we're going to need the value of it. So if we cleared it, the value would always come back 0 and this just wouldn't work. But what we do want to do is clear that second drop down box. And then we also want to do the same exact thing down here when we get that unknown. So anytime that you write something to a spreadsheet with Google Apps Script, or you're using if statements, especially what we're doing, this nested if statement, it's going to provide an impact on your performance. It's going to slow your code and functionality down quite a bit. There are many ways to create a dependent drop-down list. A 2-level drop-down is easier than, say, a 3, 4, or 5. Because typically, if we were going to do a 3rd and a 4th level drop-down, this could work, but it would be so overly complicated and slow that it would just be painful to wait for these to update. So there'll be a different way to do this, but since we went over if, we're going to leave it just like this. So what I would like to do is coming back over here, let's check that code that we just did just to make sure it's working. So we'll refresh. So now when we select people analytics, it'll populate here, and then we'll select comp analysis. And then what we'll do is we'll go up and change candidate. It should remove all that and then populate it again. Employee. Okay, good. And then if we select that and then say, I really have no idea what I'm doing, I need help, it clears out, and then it's, yep, calm down and please contact HR. Okay, awesome. So that works. So what I would like to do is actually have something happen when somebody selects this second drop-down box. So we can put in headers here, and let's just say this is please select. And maybe over here in D, we'll do employee, do employee head count. Now, what I would like to do is have something happen over here in maybe E2 when somebody presses this. So let's go back here and change something here real quick so I can get the vision clear, because if I try and talk about it now, it's going to be confusing. So let's change this instead of comp analysis. Let's do this as company level and this as division level. And now let's save this and go back to our sheet. And maybe what I want to do will be a little bit clearer. So when we refresh this to pick up that new code we wrote, when we go to people analytics and somebody wants to say division level, what we're looking to do is have our code go in and grab all of our data here and then filter by division. And then once that's filtered, count how many people are in that division and then populate it in this field right here. And what triggers that to happen is when somebody makes a selection here. And we've done that already by this first level drop down, this DD1 here. That code runs when it registers a change here. So we can kind of take the same logic and approach for this second drop down box. We just have to make sure that we find it correctly and place it correctly inside our code. Now, since we have this if statement and we have an if statement within that if statement, it can be somewhat confusing to read. So let's look at what's actually happening here. So our first if statement is checking for an event in this A3 cell. That's that first drop down box. So if something changes or is edited within that A3 cell, then what it's going to do is it's initially going to clear that stuff. And then it's going to run this if statement to check the value of that. And this is all focused on our A3. What we're looking for is after it figures all this stuff out, then we want to run another code, because essentially what we're wanting is that this right here isn't changing. So we're wanting to find the end of this if statement right here, because everything else below this if statement, all of this belongs to that if statement. And this if statement only fires if something is happening in this A3 cell. So if nothing's happening in this A3 cell, then we can give it something else to do with an else if. So say if the A3 cell didn't change, but the A4 did, then we can fire off another code. And that A4 is our second drop down. So we can find where this is. We can either do it one of two ways. We can highlight the curly bracket and come to the end, or what we could do with Google Apps Script in this project board here is we can go to the line that has that if and then close it. Now that was the nested if, but if we come up here to our first if, it closes all the guts, so to speak, of that if statement. And then it aligns it to where it ends. So this is an easy way to do this. So if this if statement is wrong, if it comes back false, that A3 cell didn't change, but it was the A4, and that's what we're going to look for, we need to say, okay, well, that failed. Now check this one. Else if E range, and we'll keep it get A1 notation just because that's what we started with. And if that A1 notation is specifically equal to A4, remember it needs to be in a string, then we want to run another code. And this code, just to see how this is working and make sure it's working, let's just fire off an alert. And that alert can simply say, in the second DD and I just got fired. Ha. And then if that comes back false, then we just don't want it to do a thing. We'll just say else empty bracket. And then we can expand this and see the whole picture. So good. So now let's save this and come back to our sheet. Reload our code to pick it up. And now let's go into, just do employee. You'll notice there's no alert popping up here. But now when we select this and change this value, it should fire that alert. I am the second DD and I just got fired. Okay, so now let's change it to candidate. As you can see, it cleared the value before it ran that secondary check. And the reason why we placed it there is just for that reason. If we wanted to ensure that this was cleared and then it checked for the change. So then we hit reject. I'm the second DD and just got fired. So now what we need to do is grab the value of this. And we can do that. Just simply grab the value and have it populate in a second alert. So let's go ahead and do that. And we can just build it right here in our else if statement. Now there's other ways that we can do this. And we'll talk about that maybe at the end of this video or the beginning of next. But for now, let's just keep building on with our if statement. What we want to do is get the value of that A4 cell now after it's been fired, after it's been changed and edited. So we can do that by doing our dashboard SS, and we want to get the range of 4, 1, and we want to get the value of that cell. And let's store this in a variable, and let's just call this variable, let's second DD value, I suppose that'll work. And then let's log this, not log it out, but let's produce this in an alert so we can see it on our UI. So now what'll happen is it won't do any of this because A3 isn't the one that changed. A4 is the one that changed. It'll first send this alert, and then it'll go and grab the value, store it in a variable, and then it'll produce a second alert. At least that's the way we're hoping we wrote it. Okay, so let's refresh it. And let's go to candidate. And let's go to move to hire. Our first one should fire. Yep, I just got fired. And now a second one should fire with that value. So now that we have this value, we can actually build yet another if statement around to populate something within our E2 cell. Let's just go ahead and populate something in here real quick. Just to make sure that we got that piece down. And what we can do is just populate this value here. Let's get rid of this UI. And then what we can do is just populate that value and that range to E2 is row 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's going to be row 2, column 5. And we want to set the value to this second DD value. So now when we run it, we should see that value pop up in E5 or E2, excuse me. So we'll come back to our sheet, refresh it. Let's do people analytics. And when we select it this time, we'll get that initial box, that initial alert saying it popped up. I just got fired. And then it'll take this value here and it should populate it right here. And it's not because of why. So let's go back here and look. And the reason why it didn't was because I did not save. So let's save that. It was running on the old code. All right, it's saved. So now let's refresh it. That was odd. I was wondering why that second alert came up. And now let's do the people analytics again. Division level. First alert. Yep, you just got fired. And then there it is. Good. So now it's bolded. We can change that to bold. So now we know that we can populate things into this field based on that. So now instead of populating something in that field, let's write another if statement to populate something based on that, depending on this. So let's come back here to that, our code here. And right here, we can do yet another if statement for now. Or what we can do is break this into another function. So we can call another function based on specifically based on the second DD value. So let's do that. Let's come in here and let's write another function. And what we can do with this function is check both those. And this is where it can get confusing, but I want to ensure that y'all have code snippets for not just one comparison, but also two. So let's, instead of this, we can leave that for now. Let's do pop data. And what I just wrote here is if A4 does get changed, then what we want to do is we want to let this second value, this second DD value here, we want to get the value of it, store it in that variable, and then we want to set that value to there, to that E2, and then we want to run this pop data. So let's create that pop data now. And anytime you have just the name of the function with the parentheses, that is indicating that you want to send and run a function. And what we could do is, here in a second, I'll do this, but really we could pass this variable as an argument down here, but let's get the function built first. Pop data. And what we want to do with this pop data is let's grab this variable again. And this is the reason why we can pass this variable, because we're just using it again and again. And then let's write an if statement to where if the second, if second value, second DD value, is strictly equal to, what do we got? Company level, then we want it to do something. And then we can write else if second DD value is equal to division level, then we want it to do something else. Else, we can just do a UI dot alert and just say error. Okay, good. So now we can build in what it is that we want to have happen. So if this is a company level, ideally what we would want to have happen is for our code to come over and grab all of this data. And what we can do, instead of having to wait until our code grabs this, we could build it in here, but instead of having to wait until that is built, what we can do is make this a global variable up here. Make this employee data. Now, we've used employee data before, but it is over here in our reference, and our reference is all commented out, so it's just being skipped over. But if we didn't have that referenced out, this may be a problem. In our employee data, we want to go to our sheet, which is our records, and we want to get a range, and we want that range to start at, we want that range to not start at row 1, because row 1 is our headers. We want to start at row 2. Now, starting at row 2, it's still going to count. If we use get last row, which is what we're wanting to use, it's going to count this header, but it's going to add it down there at the bottom because it's wanting to count how many rows it has, and then it goes down that many rows. So we can take care of that. But the reason why we're using get last row and then get last column is because this is going to change. Particularly the row is going to change, because as we move employees around, bring new employees on or whatever, this whole list here is going to change. And since each row contains a full set of columns worth of data, which means that there's not more data here, we can use get last row. So let's come back over here, and we're going to start at row 2, column 1, and then we want to get the last row of that entire sheet. And to do that, we declare the sheet, we grab it, reference it, and then we want to get the last row. This is a method, so you need those parentheses. And remember, since we're starting out at 2, it's going to have that extra row at the bottom. So we want to -1, and then we want to get the last column. And then in there, what we want to do is we want to get values. So now what we can do is we can actually grab this and put it in an alert. The alert's going to be horrible, but we can at least fire the alert with that employee data when it's the company level or when it is the division level. So let's save this. And let's go back to our sheet, back to our dashboard, and let's refresh this drop down. Let's refresh the whole page. Now it's pulling that employee variable, or that global variable right now, and it's storing it. So when we click create drop down, theoretically, all that data should already be in employee data. So let's go over to People Analytics. You'll notice that this didn't clear, but we already know how to clear that. Let's go to division level. We should have that. I'm the second DD and I just got fired. And then here we go. We got it. So as you can see, we just populated an alert with all of our employee data. So it is now working. So what we can do is, because we're able to call this employee data, we can now do something with the employee data. So instead of an alert, we can simply put employee data. Now remember, this is a 2-dimensional array. So what we can do is pull out a index. So let's click OK, and let's find an index and say we want the division, right? Now, arrays are 0 based. So 0, 1, 2, 3. So if we were to just simply go over to our third index. Let's go back here to our code here. And if we were to put our square bracket 3, well, remember, this is a two-dimensional array. So a two-dimensional array is row first and however many columns. So say we wanted to get this cell right here, we would need to start out at square bracket 4, which is the fourth array, and then 0, 1, 2, 3. Or this would be 0, 1, 2, 3, and 3. So if we were to come in here and isolate that down to 3, and when we save this, it should populate with sales. Let's come over here and create it. Let's go back to our dashboard here. Go to People Analytics. Now that was only in our company level. And we should have IT being populated. So let's go see what that is. We're starting at 2, 0, 1, 2, 3. So that's right. We started at the second row. So now we know that we can drill in and pull data, but what we're wanting to do is grab all of, if we've selected division, we want to grab all of the divisions. And we can do that by filtering. If you remember, we did a filter method to filter this whole row of data. Now, instead of a division, a user could come over here and hit company level, and the company level can simply just add all of the employee records and then place that number right there. So I'm actually going to, we're at about 30 minutes. I want to keep this digestible. I'm actually going to end this here. And then in the next video, we will build out the company level and populating that employee head count as well as that filter for the division and then populating that out. But we'll start with the company level. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative. If it was, please hit that subscribe button. And we hope to see you next time. Please take care.